Alright, so it's officially less than 24 hours until I get to see How to Train Your Dragon 3. From the time that you guys are going to watch this, obviously I'm recording it earlier than that. But either way, I'm super excited about it, and I'm super excited to talk about this movie. Probably my favorite animated movie ever, though the recent Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse has kind of given it a run for its money in that regard. As much as I had to say about the last movie, I don't know if I'm going to have that much to say about this one. I've got my notes here. I'm going to run through them like I always do. I don't know how long this is going to pan out to be. I may start rambling and go off on a tangent. I'm going to try not to. I like this movie so much more, but honestly, I kind of feel like it speaks for itself, if that makes any sense. I wouldn't say that I feel like I have to justify why the first movie is good. It's just, I think I think about it more. Because this movie speaks for itself, I think better. Like the last movie, this one is a coming-of-age story, though I get the impression from these two movies that all three movies in this trilogy are part of the same coming-of-age story. We'll see when I get to see the next one tomorrow, but that's the impression that I get. And that's not to say that the story of this movie feels any less complete than the story of the last one. It's still a complete story, and I think that's one of the best things about its narrative specifically. When placed next to How to Train Your Dragon 1, this movie feels very much like a direct continuation of the story and themes of that movie, which did not, at the end, feel like it needed a continuation. This episode opens on a pretty neat action sequence where we see the other dragon riders other than Hiccup dragon racing, and it's super cool. But one of the best things about this movie is that even when stuff is happening, and they do this a lot during like scene transitions, for example, especially when things are happening, like exciting things are happening in the foreground, they will take the time to focus on the background and make it the foreground for just a moment and give you some insight into the characters and their relationships as they stand now. So as this really cool action sequence is happening, we get a scene with Stoic where it's indicated that he has recently had a difficult talk with Hiccup that's going to come into play later. It's really brilliant storytelling that uses the sharp focus that you've already directed towards the screen because of the action sequence to make sure you don't miss that important detail in what is technically the background. We know two things at this point. Stoic talked to Hiccup about something that Hiccup didn't take well, and Hiccup isn't here for this event that all of his friends are participating in, which has left Stoic disappointed. And what's really cool about this is Stoic's emotions here feel genuine. If you watched the first movie, then you know that he and Hiccup have come to understand each other, so this almost definitely isn't him going back on that and trying to mold Hiccup into someone more like himself. This is most likely something a lot more genuine than that. So when we switch to the next scene and we see Hiccup flying with Toothless, and it's so perfect. The visuals here are so much better than in the previous movie, where they were already fantastic. The background music just screams adventure and thrill-seeking. It's perfect. It sucks you in and makes you feel like you're right there with the characters experiencing what they're experiencing. And there's even a little bit of world building here when we see that Hiccup and Toothless have been working on gliding independently of each other. Hiccup's now wearing this dragon-based leather suit which allows him to glide, and Toothless has a new rig on his prosthesis that allows him to glide without Hiccup in the driver's seat. It's just so good, and usually a transition like that would be used to show us that the kid's perspective is right over the dad's, because how could it not be? This is so much more fun than sitting around in that stuffy village. But the village isn't a stuffy village anymore. They've got dragons now. The dragons from the nest in the previous movie live at Burke now, and they're playing this awesome dragon-themed sport, and Stoic seems so genuine in his emotions. So already we know that the conflict between the two of them in this movie is a valid conflict that holds weight on both sides, and which is probably not going to be resolved in a way that is satisfactory to both parties by the time the movie's over. And then later, when we get our first scene between Hiccup and Astrid, which, by the way, I just have to say, is the cutest thing ever. Like, we see Astrid imitating Hiccup, and it's so perfect. It's a cute funny scene, which is entirely appropriate within the context of this movie, but which also serves as a form of exposition. Now we know exactly where their relationship is at this point in time, and how much they have grown, and how close they have grown to one another since the last movie ended. All without it having to be explained to us. It's shown to us brilliantly in a scene that is so perfectly realized that it made these two characters one of my favorite fictional couples of all time. Astrid, though, during this conversation is able to work out what that big conversation between Hiccup and Stoic was about. Stoic wants to make Hiccup the chief, and I don't know if this is true of everyone, but at this point, immediately I kind of got the sense that Stoic's days were numbered, and that he kind of knows that. He's an old Viking, after all, and it's not as if Berk isn't a violent place at all. Old Vikings don't tend to keep living much longer. It really does seem that he is pushing Hiccup to become the chief of this village, giving up what he's been working on, which is taking Toothless out and mapping the area more completely than they possibly could have before they had flight capabilities. He wants Hiccup to put that on hold and become the chief. And what's cool about it is there's no indication that he wants Hiccup to be a chief more like the kind of chief that he is. You really do get the sense that he has come to accept his son so much that he just believes that much that Hiccup, as he is, could be a great chief in the ways that he would be chief, if that makes sense. Like, there's no reversion here. Stoic hasn't gone back to wanting Hiccup to be a more traditional Viking. He just believes in his son that much, as he is now. And I went really super into detail about this beginning bit of storytelling, because now I can tell you the storytelling continues like that through the rest of the movie. And it kind of telegraphs what's going to happen later, something that we saw in the trailers for the movie, but it doesn't even matter. And then when we find out who the villain of this movie is going to be, a guy named Drago Bloodfist, or Drago, I think they pronounce it. I'm probably going to pronounce it both ways throughout this review, honestly. When we find out about him, we don't see him immediately. He is introduced to us through some exposition from this character here, whatever his name was.
I'm Eret, son of Eret.
I actually know his name, it's just he really seems to like introducing himself. And so what information Hiccup brings back to Berk about this person who we are told is going to come for Berk's dragons at some point soon, is a name. That's it. We know his name, and we know that at this point in his life, he's trapping dragons. That's what he's doing. He is trapping dragons and forming a dragon army. We also know that some other dragon rider has seemingly been interfering, because when Hiccup shows up, the trappers recognize him as a dragon rider and think he's affiliated with this other person. But about Drago specifically, all we know is the name, and when that name is relayed to Stoic, all hell breaks loose. And it's Stoic's reaction, which tells us everything that we need to know, that this Drago person is not someone to be messed with. We get a flashback telling us his backstory, and it seems that he is pretty freaking dangerous, but Hiccup doesn't want to hear that. He doesn't think that they should jump to the conclusion that they have to fight, and that comes back to bite him in the end. In fact, he thinks that he can just go off and solve the problem himself, that he can make peace with this guy, I guess, by just talking to him. Like, I get that that's kind of what Hiccup's been all about up to this point, but obviously that's not going to work. It's just, Hiccup is still immature enough as a character that he doesn't see that yet, unfortunately. We learn later on in this movie that Hiccup's mom, who was a lot like him, at least from what we can tell, was seemingly killed in a dragon raid. And while that does lead to him venturing out into places that this other dragon rider visits, uncovering that that other dragon rider is his mom, who actually formed a bond with a dragon before he did with Toothless and became the first dragon rider, and that she chose not to come home, that she chose to live with dragons from this point forward because she couldn't stand to see dragons killed, knowing what she knows about them, and she didn't expect Stoic to ever change his mind about them, creating this much deeper connection between Hiccup, his entire family, and dragons as a whole. It also, unfortunately, leads to the first faux climax of the movie. This movie actually kind of has two climaxes, during which Drago's forces clash with Hiccup's mother's various dragons that she has befriended over the years, as well as Stoic and some of the other dragon riders who were present, and it leads to Stoic being killed. And what's worse is, because Drago's personal dragon, or at least his favorite dragon out of the ones that he's trapped, is an alpha dragon, much like the very large dragon from the first movie, which could compel other dragons to do its bidding. Drago is actually able to compel Toothless to kill Stoic. It's Toothless who kills Stoic, and Hiccup is an intelligent enough and compassionate enough person that he recognizes that Toothless didn't do this of his own volition, and so doesn't blame him, at least not for long. But still, it's a heartbreaking scene. Even though I kind of suspected that Stoic was going to die soon, maybe even in this movie, this was definitely a really shocking way to go about it. Like, I think they recognized that they had kind of telegraphed too hard that Stoic was going to die soon, and so did this as a way of making sure that his death was still shocking to the audience. And it sucks. It sucks so bad because he had just been reunited with his wife in one of the most beautiful musical sequences in any movie ever. The song that they sing together when they're reunited, it's beautiful. It has, since I saw this movie, become one of those songs that if I hear it, I cry. There's just no two ways about it. It's gonna happen. You never once don't believe that these are two long-lost loves who are finally reuniting with one another after so long. Everything from the animation to the voice acting to even the environment in which they reunite in, to the staging and the directing of the scenes, it comes together perfectly. It resonates with exactly the emotions that it was supposed to resonate with. And it sucks because Stoic dies right after this. Like, not immediately after this, but very, very soon after this. He just got her back, and then he dies. She just got him back, and now he's gone. But at the same time, you kind of feel happy for them, because if Hiccup hadn't run off on his own and ended up at this place, and if therefore Stoic hadn't had to come here and try to save him along with the others, if everyone had remained holed up in Berk the way that Stoic wanted, he probably would have died when Drago came for Berk anyway, and he wouldn't have gotten to see his wife again at all. But at the end of the day, Hiccup was technically responsible for his father's death. Like, I definitely get the sense that one of the reasons that Hiccup was able to forgive Toothless as quickly as he did was because he thought about it and realized that Stoic died here today because of what Hiccup did, because Hiccup didn't listen to him and ran off to try to confront Drago on his own, despite his father's warnings. But what's really interesting about this is that neither Hiccup or Stoic's approach was entirely right. Stoic wanted to shore up Berk and wait for an attack which surely would have been disastrous for them. Hiccup wanted to run off and appeal to the villain and try to turn them around to his way of thinking without actually knowing anything about this person and without listening to anyone who did know something about him. Both were wrong. And they kind of just got lucky that their two approaches happening simultaneously happened to lead to an outcome which didn't get them all killed, honestly. Because if Hiccup hadn't run off, he wouldn't have run into his mom. His mom does something to Toothless, which eventually allows Toothless, in the real climax of the movie, to elevate himself to the level of alpha, and therefore counter Drago's alpha and defeat him. But, and this is going to sound really harsh, without the lesson that he learned from effectively causing his father's death, I don't think that Hiccup would have been able to take on the role of leader that he had to accept before Toothless accepted his role as a leader of dragons. There's some other action sequences in here that I didn't talk about. Like, there's one where they actually turn that one guy,
I am Eric, son of Earth,
around to their side. He actually gets redeemed and turns from a dragon tracker into a dragon rider, proving that Hiccup's approach isn't wrong in all situations. It's just it wasn't appropriate in this one. But honestly, that's really it. That's the story of this movie. It's a big jumbled mess. I'm sorry I didn't really go chronologically. I can't really talk in any kind of reasonable manner about this movie. I just love it too much. My mind goes all over the place. This review is going to be absolutely terrible. I know it already. Whatever, I'm not changing it. Point is, this movie is brilliant. It's just, I think, perfectly executed. all of the characters, all of the primary focal characters at least, make mistakes in this movie. Hiccup makes some of the worst mistakes that a person can make, but you never come to dislike his character because of them. It never diminishes his character in the eye of the viewer. And we don't see much of him after the climax of this movie is over. That's pretty much the end of the movie. He becomes chief, and that's it. But you do get the sense that he is not going to forget the lessons that he learned from the events in this movie, the events that in some ways he caused. And in a lot of ways, things are better for the Burkians now, but in some ways, they're significantly worse. But you still feel that Hiccup now, as chief, with his novel views and armed with the lessons that he learned throughout this movie, he can really make things much better for them in the long run. That he's not going to make mistakes like this again, and therefore they will be better overall. Things will be better for them overall. Everything just, it fits together so well. No element in this movie feels unnecessary. Even the other Dragon Rider characters who feel a little superfluous of the first movie, while you still feel like they don't do a lot, they still aren't developed a ton, you don't feel like this movie would be the same movie without them with just a few rewrites. The comedy manages to land, at the very least, a chuckle in every instance in which comedy is attempted. The action is flawless. The scenery, animation is flawless. The animation overall, the character designs, the character interactions, they're all flawless. Like, I hate that Stoic died. I hate going into watching this movie again each time I go back to watch this movie. I hate knowing that he's going to die. But I'm not mad about it. I don't feel like his death was unnecessary, like it was a shock death, like so many deaths in fiction are. It feels like it belongs here. And that's really freaking hard to do. And all of this is given to us in a super complex movie, which also manages to sneak world building into the background. I mentioned earlier that Hiccup throughout this movie is wearing a set of armor which can also act as a glide suit. We are never flat out told that he developed this based on the information he learned from working so closely with a dragon, but we can infer that from what is said and from what we're shown. And based on the trailers for the next movie, it looks like they've taken this technology even a step further and have started using, I don't know, the hides of dragons who have died naturally, or maybe just dragon scales, to make even more advanced dragon-themed armor for the Dragon Riders. Hiccup has this really cool fire sword that he wields throughout this movie, which is slim and agile just like he is, but which he was able to design based on learning how dragon fire works. And even though this gear is perfectly suited for combat, it also has an added function of making it easier for Hiccup to bond with dragons and make it clear to them that he's not their enemy when put in a situation where they might think so. And we are shown all of this as background elements in this already super complex story, and it doesn't feel bloated at all. It all feels natural. In fact, if you asked me to describe this movie in one sentence, it would be that everything that happens in this movie feels natural. Like, how many fantasy movies can you say that about? It's just so good. It's such a good movie that takes the foundation laid by the first movie and builds something magnificent on top of it. Something, I think, even more magnificent than the original on top of it. And if I say any more, I am going to start doing that rambling thing that I said I was going to try not to do. So I'm going to end it here. I love this movie. It is, in my mind, a 10 out of 10. A perfect film. That said, though, I'm very curious to hear what you guys think about it. And by all means, discuss plot points that I didn't feel like I had time to touch in this review, because there are several of them. Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. I have been actually going there more often, so you can feel pretty confident that I will see a comment that you leave there for me. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.